Is David K. Johnson, columnist for Reuters and author of the book Free Lunch. And Jon Soltz is also with us tonight, chairman of VoteVets.org. Gentlemen, great to have you with us. David, you first. How advantageous are these offshore holdings by Bain for Mitt Romney?
Well, they're enormously better than 15%, Ed, because you and I and John and most of the viewers get a paycheck from which the government takes the taxes out before we get our money. And if you're a single person making a bit over $60,000, you're paying 15% of your income to the federal government. But Romney set up these deals where he was allowed to get compensation, not investments, compensation for managing other people's investments, and be paid with what's called carried interest. Well, he doesn't pay any taxes on that until he cashes out. He'll pay taxes on any dividends or other things that flow out of it. But imagine if you could, for 5 or 10 or 20 years, have wealth in your bank account or your offshore account, and all you had to do was pay this low 15% rate on the dividends that flows from that, and your wealth is untaxed. But we don't know how much of his wealth is untaxed, and we won't unless we get his tax returns all the way back to 1984.
Well, you know, you talk about that carried interest. Today, Rupert Murdoch put this out on Twitter. He says Romney's tax uses a long-term legal loophole. Carried interest makes all fund managers rich. It's time both parties stop selling out to Wall Street. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that if I were a Wall Street executive or a hedge fund manager, I'd be really worried about Romney running, because once ordinary Americans sitting around the kitchen table understand this, and that's what my column at Reuters will be about tomorrow, once they understand this and how this game is rigged far worse than they've ever been told, there's going to be public pressure to end this practice of pay now, pay your taxes years later.
John, your group VoteVets has a petition to get Romney to release his tax returns. Why is this an important issue for VoteVets?
Well, look, he's running for commander-in-chief, and it's no surprise that you can go into any Army Times or Military Times article and see what the military pay scale is. You know, look, when we're in Iraq or Afghanistan deployed, we get actually, you know, a non-taxable income for those months that we're deployed. But when we return, we're probably taxed at a higher rate than the man that wants to be president. But when we are deployed, there's a certain percent of officers that are field-grade officers and higher that actually do pay taxes, because we're only allowed to get tax-free pay up to the highest enlisted man. So if you're running to be president, there's a leadership responsibility here that the troops need to know. You know, who the commander-in-chief is. I mean, you don't have this type of secrecy. I think that's the first issue. The second issue is really simple. I mean, the public is appalled at the fact that people that can spend 20 years fighting for our country could possibly be paying higher taxes. I mean, we're the real 1% than a man who's making hundreds of millions of dollars annually. And this is something the public has a right to have disclosure on, and so do the troops.
Is there anything in his tax returns that you could think would disqualify him for the presidency? I mean, everything he's doing right now is legal. It may not seem fair to the average Joe or to the combat soldier or to retired veterans, but do you see anything that could disqualify him, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, I can't see these things. I have no idea, but its perception is reality. And what, you know, VoteVets.org, we just released a poll yesterday with Celinda Lake where we looked at veterans' messages in battleground states. And this is the issue that popped. It wasn't veterans talking to veterans. It's the issue that in places like Ohio and Pennsylvania or Michigan or Montana, where you start looking at Republican white men and white independent men, I mean, these people are appalled to find out that the wealthiest 1% actually is in a lower tax bracket based on the capital gain structure than people who served 20 years, the real 1%, the people who spent 20 years fighting for our country. So politically, it's an Achilles heel, and I think if it wasn't, he would have released these things already.
David K., is there anything that he can do between now and the date that he's going to release these returns, I guess the middle of April, that might soften the blow a little bit? Or it's just done and that's the way it is?
I think he's got a real quandary here. First of all, he shouldn't delay till April. You get the news out and you try to get it over with and move on. But as soon as he releases those returns, people are going to recognize that he's been running for president now for 5 years. He's had 5 years to shape his finances to make whatever return he makes public look as good as possible. The returns that matter are the ones from 1984, when Bain was founded, through 2000. Those are the ones that will tell us about the money he made, and it's not investment income, as he calls it. It's compensation, just like your and my paycheck, that under this special rule hasn't been taxed or isn't taxed until he sells that compensation that buys him shares.
Well, both parties are guilty of not doing anything about it. The wealthy, they shake down the Senate and the House, and they give to both parties, and so there hadn't really been any real push to change any of these loopholes. Is that fair enough?
Yes, but if people call the Capitol switchboard and ask for their congressperson by name and say, you got to stop this, we may see some movement about it. But absolutely, there's only one political party right now in Washington. It's the party of the greenback.
Well, we've had such a big discussion in this country about income inequality. I show the chart up quite often. I call it the vulture chart. The top 2%, their income has gone up almost 300% over the last 30 years, where the blue liners have only seen a modest increase in wages over the last 30 years. And I would imagine for soldiers, that's the same way for the military. The military is down there at the blue line. And I just don't think that this is a real good morale issue, is it, John?
No, I mean, the soldiers are, we call ourselves the 1% because we're always gone, but we're, people who've served are regular Americans. They're making, between $25,000 in taxable income up to maybe $80,000 or $90,000 in taxable income. And then retirees get 50% after they serve 20 years, but the longer you serve. So you're talking about middle class people. That's why we're involved in this issue. The veterans are the middle class. I mean, it's why we had 4,000 veterans and military families sign this petition. I mean, we have pending budget cuts going on over at the Pentagon. Is Governor Romney, if he's president, going to want to 401k the pension system so he can continue to pay 15% taxes or even lower because he's relying on offshore accounts? I mean, these are real concerns. Is he going to take from these middle class programs that have been earned? They're not given to us, but have been earned by military retirees so he can keep himself, in municipal bond funds that pay 0% taxes or on a carried interest program where he's actually playing with other people's money that he gets taxed as capital gains even though it wasn't his principal in the first place.
Great point. David K. Johnson, always a pleasure. Jon Soltz, great to have you on the program tonight.
Thanks.
Thanks for your insight on all of that.